Thomas Andrek, your voice for the PPC and Whitby. 70 degrees outside, beautiful sunny day this 1st November 2022. It gives me an opportunity and a chance to take a look back on the last few weeks and months of what's been happening in this world. The only thing that can be really said is that it's a crazy time in history and a crazy time to be alive. I mean, we see throughout the world record inflation, record debt accumulation. We see Europe being tossed into absolute chaos. We see them having record unemployment rates, having record electricity rates, record low natural gas stocks, record high prices for gasoline and diesel. We see war being waged between the United States and Russia being mislabeled as a war between the Ukraine and Russia. And we see our own insanities here in Canada. And one of those insanities is obviously the so-called inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. And I'm sure we remember the Emergencies Act being used, being implemented, and why. We look back into the past year, 2022, January, February of this year. We remember the Freedom Convoy rolling into Ottawa. And the reason for the Freedom Convoy and the protest is to protest the use of federal mandates, those mandates that limited our inherent freedoms as Canadian citizens, not government-given freedoms, but inherent, God-given, born with us freedoms, freedoms of movement, freedom to have a job, freedom to a good life, freedom to employment, freedom from fear, freedom from coercion of our government, freedom from fearing our government. These are the things that were being protested because we know that the mandates were exactly there. They were coercive, they were punitive, and they were nothing more than there to be for punishment. They were there for us to comply, to make us comply to what the government wanted. They said, oh, it's for our safety, but we know and we saw and things are coming out and evidence is all there that it was all for compliance and nothing more. Comply to what the government tells you to do or else. We know that this was why that these mandates were being implemented, and people understood that this trampled on our constitutional rights, trampled our inherent God-given freedoms. This was reason for the protests. But we know what our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did. He saw us as terrorists. He saw us as terrorists. Everybody who went to Ottawa to protest, who did not agree with what the government was doing, was labeled a misogynist, a racist, and a whole slew of other names. Basically, a terrorist, persona non grata, somebody who was un-Canadian. Because we saw things differently. We were protesting these mandates. We did not accept what the government was telling us, mandating us, forcing us to do. Thus comes the Emergencies Act. And it wasn't just Justin Trudeau. We know this. It was the NDP, the Bloc Québécois, all these people, power-hungry people. Sickening to the stomach of how power-hungry these people are. And the Liberals and even the Conservatives went in on it. They were in on it. Mandates. And at the end of the day, the reason for the enactment and of the Emergencies Act was to make sure compliance was 100%. If you did not comply, then there were consequences for you not complying. And the Emergencies Act gave unprecedented power to the RCMP, to the police enforce, local police enforcements. They could confiscate whatever they wanted. They could throw you in jail for no reason. And what people didn't at that time understand, still don't understand to this day, that through that enactment, every Canadian citizen's constitutional rights were suspended. Nobody had any. If a police officer thought you were some sort of threat, even though you were in Whitby, even if you were in Winnipeg, Vancouver, it didn't matter, anywhere within the country, not necessarily in Ottawa, your rights were suspended. If you were in Lethbridge, Alberta, and you donated $10 to the Freedom Convoy, guess what? Your account was suspended. Your bank account was suspended. Banks complied. This is scary things here, people. Banks complied. Never, ever has this ever happened. Only under Justin Trudeau. Because he could not, his narcissistic nature could not understand and could not accept that people did not comply to his will and bend their knee. There were people who were actually protesting and not accepting and wanting to talk and wanting to reason and wanting to be democratic. The most undemocratic person in this country, most undemocratic party in this country, the Liberal Party. We saw what happened. People getting beaten up for no reason, people being thrown in jail, ribs broken, arms broken, people trampled on, people's bank accounts suspended, people not being able to access their accounts, etc., etc. All fear mongering, all fear tactics. Everything was used and thrown in. We heard Minister Mendicini, Minister LeBlanc, all saying the same thing. The police enforcement, local police enforcement, and RCMP were asking for these powers. We've heard it. We heard it. We remember these things. We don't forget. These are extremely important dates and times in history. You're not going to forget these things. They think we will, but we won't, and we never will. And what's coming out now through the inquiries? What's happening? We're seeing it. We've been hearing it. They're lying. They're all lying. They're all passing the buck. Nobody wants to accept responsibility for the use of the Emergencies Act because they understand that the use of it was not needed. The use of it was unconstitutional. The evidence is there that the Emergencies Act was used for no good reason. There was no good reason for it being used. Other than that, their egos were hurt. And they wanted to stick to power, and they wanted to show the people of Canada, you either comply and do it as we tell you or else. That's the only reason. Mr. Singh, same thing. The Bloc Québécois, same thing. Conservatives, basically the same thing, because they also accepted that these mandates be implemented, these federal mandates be implemented. We know that they jumped on the bandwagon later on, but that's beside the point, because the PPC and Maxime Bernier and all the PPC candidates and their members were on board that this is unconstitutional, this is against our human rights. We remember this, but we hear it now. Everybody is blaming the other for it being used, for it being implemented. We know that Doug Ford, the so-called conservative, and we know he's not because he's Justin Trudeau's buddy, is trying to get out of having to testify at the inquiry. And there are other people who are trying to get out of testifying. But those who are testifying, local law enforcement officers, RCMP officers, and anybody else, they're all blaming each other and saying, no, we never asked for it. We didn't want it. No this, no that. And they're pointing fingers at each other. Complete chaos, but things are coming out, and it shows that nobody wants to accept accountability. Nobody wants to accept responsibility. And they're all blaming each other, meaning it was not necessary. And the use of force that was shown at that time, completely unconstitutional, completely illegal. The suspension of our rights, every citizen's rights, completely unconstitutional. We know this. It's coming out. My only fear is that we've become a banana republic and there'll be no accountability. Nobody will be held accountable. The only thing we can do is ensure that we don't forget. Don't forget who was for the mandates, these federal mandates, who was there for the coercion of people, the coercion, of the fear factor being put into decision making. People having to fear for their lives, for their livelihood, fear for their family, fear for their future. People who are put in jail for no reason. People who are for the mandates. People who are there for the Emergencies Act to be enacted. We won't forget. And don't forget, the only party, the only people who are there for holding up our inalienable rights, our inherent rights, those rights that we were born with and those that are emblazoned in our Constitution, was the PPC from day one. We were there every day. We were protesting that against the mandates every day. There was no bandwagon jumping here, because we were the original ones who are saying this is unconstitutional. You cannot take away these rights. Please don't forget who is with you, who is with the Canadian people, and who is with the Canadian people to this day. It's the PPC. Maxime Bernier and all of us. We're there for you, and we will always be there for you. Let's hope that there will be some sort of accountability, but if not, when our next election is called, please remember, we were the only ones there for you, with you, shoulder to shoulder, every day, throughout the protests, throughout the mandates, through thick and thin. Talk to you later.